All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We may have a few members come in, Congresswoman Tenney and Congressman Min, and a few others, and if they do, we'll invite them to say a few words. So that's the only interruption we'll have. Otherwise, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. There is so much going on in this space, as you all know, and I think this is going to be a very productive discussion, and we also want it to be interactive. So we'll get through our questions and answer session up here, and then please keep your questions till the end, and we will go all day long if we have to. But we want to make sure that you leave both with an understanding of what's happening on the ground in Iran, as well as an understanding of what it means to overcome this digital blockade and censorship. These are complicated technologies. I know just enough to pretend like I do know what I'm talking about, but everybody up here actually does know what they're talking about. So I think if you want to drill down into what these things do, how VPNs are deployed, we'll have that conversation here, but if there's burning questions that are lingering, please do ask them. So my name is Nick Stewart. I'm Managing Director of Advocacy at FDD Action. We are the C4 sister organization to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And I'm joined by really an all-star expert panel to talk about both digital censorship in Iran and just Iran generally. So to my immediate right is Behnam Bentaleblu. He's Senior Director of the Iran Program at FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He is a native Persian speaker. He tracks Iranian nuclear proliferation, ballistic missile, pretty much everything that's going on in Iran, Behnam tracks. He's testified before Congress, the Canadian Parliament, the UK House of Commons, and his analysis appears regularly in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and on and on and on. If you've turned on BBC News or Fox News, you've maybe seen Behnam the last couple weeks.
The late shift.
The late shift and the early shift, but we're getting closer to prime time. Then to his, I guess your left, is Neda Balorshi, who is Executive Director of the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans. She is a subject matter expert on the Middle East and a functional expert on governance, rule of law, elections, and human rights. She holds a PhD from Columbia University and previously served as Associate Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Rutgers University. And then, last but certainly not least, is Ali Tehrani, Director of Washington Operations for Siphon. He is an expert in Siphon is an anti-censorship tool, providing VPNs for people in heavily censored regions, particularly Iran, and we'll get into this in much, much greater detail. He works to keep internet windows open for protesters, communicate and share evidence of state repression, and he has been a leading voice advocating for restoration of U.S. funding to internet freedom initiatives, and we'll also get in throughout this discussion into the current state of a lot of these programs. There are a lot of opportunities for productive congressional engagement here because things, I'll say, aren't going as well as they could have. And I think if we do a bit of a postmortem, we can demonstrate in what ways we were caught a little flat-footed. So I want to start, before we get into this discussion of digital censorship, setting the stage and understanding the protests as they've evolved over these last 3 weeks and as they currently stand. So, Neda, I'd like to start with you. Protests in Iran, they've become almost a cyclical occurrence. 2017, 2019, 2022, 2023, and now 25, 26. And FDD, actually, if you go to FDD's website, they track these protests in great detail where they're taking place throughout Iran. It's probably the most comprehensive glimpse that you can get. But it's easy to view these latest protests as just another expression of dissatisfaction, popular resistance to a very unpopular regime. But how would you characterize the significance of what we've seen over the last several weeks? Particularly, is there a dimension to these protests, whether it's geographic origin, who actually came out, the regime's response, that really sets them apart from what we have seen in previous years? And what do you want us to know about these protests that's different than what came before?
Sure. I think that's a great starting point, and thank you for that question, and I'll thank you for being here. I think I'm actually going to add another year, 2009. And so Iran has experienced waves of protests, and I think lots of people in D.C. and policymakers are becoming somewhat immune to the importance and the impact of these protests. But what I think you here at Congress and the administration should understand is that what we're seeing is different in three different ways. First, This is a broader social coalition than we've seen in the past. So I am going to, as I said, go back a second to 2009. 2009, around the Green Movement, was around an election, if you might remember, or in your history classes, some of us teach them. So that was a very elitist Tehran central protest around an election. Every protest since then has actually been a broader coalition outside of the quote-unquote ruling elite, right? If that was Kharoubi and Mousavi and all these folks who were part of the revolution and their disagreement about elections, ever since then, particularly 17, 19, has been around economics and youth and student-oriented networks. What we saw with Mahsa Amini and the Woman Life Freedom in 2022, 2023, we added the women-led civic mobilization. You've had labor communities for years now, provincial cities since 2017. So crucially this time, what you can't forget in the added part of this broader social coalition is the bazaar. So we've added the economic actors who historically have functioned as a hinge between society and the state. And historically, for over a century, they have favored the state. And so let's not forget that this particular protest in December started with the bazaar. So not like the high-end bazaar, but again, nevertheless, it starts with the bazaar. And so what this is importantly, and many of you may have read the latest Foreign Affairs talking about the different conditions for revolution. And so the added economic factor of the bazaar is very important when we talk about the different stages that potentially lead to revolution as well as conditions. So we've been in the crisis stage now for several years, but with the added factor of the bazaar, we've added a separate condition, one of the 5 conditions. And so what I would say is that this is really, I talked about it in June and July, is that this is looking increasingly like a violation of the social contract, right? You guys might remember, everything is about security. If the Islamic Republic can't maintain territorial security, and if it can't maintain economic security, it's violating its social contract. So the inclusion of the bazaar is vastly important, and it signals a strategic escalation, I would say, that the bazaar is rising. And so it's not really symbolic. It has long been, again, one of the most politically consequential constituencies in Iran. And it's especially important when it moves from quiet frustration to economic resistance, and we see closures, strikes, and disruption of commercial life. And I think with that, importantly, we see that there's a change in the regime's calculation. This is no longer about street protests that can be dispersed. The protests are a legitimacy and economic stability crisis. And so it's really literally bleeding into their ability to govern. I would just add, as part of the bazaar and how we've added a broader social coalition, and we're seeing that broader coalition, the state in response, because of the addition of the bazaar and the broader social coalition, isn't just repressing protests, they're preempting, and to the point of today's briefing, preempting coordination, where they have now a much more refined strategy where repression is paired with connectivity disruption. And so I think it's unbelievably important over the last 6 months from June until December and this edition that what we're seeing is connectivity disruption. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to, I could tell you the whole lot of history about it, but let us, right,
yeah,
so
we,
this
we
is
will
what's
get
super
there.
important is we are now viably a broader social coalition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I'm building on Neda's assessment first, if there's anything that you wanted to add to that from your own analysis, but also what's the current status of the protests as we understand them today, to the extent that we can, because so much information is behind that digital wall. But to the extent that we can infer anything, some people, depending on who you talk about, say that the regime has done quite a good job. Others say the protests have become more decentralized and diffuse, but there is still pockets of resistance, and that's, these aren't over by any means. Where do things currently stand, as you understand it, in Iran?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? All right. Thanks also for turning out today. I know there's some votes, so we appreciate your time and your attention, because I think for all of us on this panel, Iranian American or not, this is an issue both of the head and of the heart. And those of you who work on the Hill, on the foreign policy side, or more on the LA side, on the national security side, it doesn't matter. But you will have noticed that there's not a lot of opportunities for America to get your morals and your strategies right at the same time in the Middle East. Sometimes you have to hold your nose, look in another direction. Sometimes one issue is supercharged politically. There's not a lot of moments like this moment that we're in now. So I just want to foot stomp the historicity of the moment that we have together and appreciate you all for kind of coming to convene and listen and perhaps potentially do something about it. So with that, the only thing I would add as a footnote to Neda's very good overview of what's going on internally is sometimes difference is more of the same. 2017 to present in terms of Iranian protests, this most recent iteration, this is like a movie we've been watching together now, all live, all in real time, and the movie is called Iran's National Uprising. Because unlike previous rounds of protests, 1999, 2009, what have you, that have, as Neda said, that elite trigger that is caused by a political phenomenon, a political event, a closure of a reformist newspaper, a stealing of an election from a reformist candidate, that rupture, that divorce between state and society continues to grow, such that the variables you see in every round of protests from 2017 to present are all there, but they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bolder and bolder and bolder. And those variables are demography, a different demography of the average protester, geography, a much wider spread, violence, street society against the state. You saw 2019, you see this one now, we'll get into. And then perhaps most importantly, slogans, the ideology, the framework, the intellectual milieu of your average protester, how they're choosing to contest the Islamic Republic, what language, what people they're calling, what ideas they're putting out there. So with these variables, demography, geography, violence, and slogans, you can begin to see why these protests are different because they're an intensification of this trend line that we've been seeing, which is this kind of national divorce between state and society. And then why it kind of matters now to the heart of Nick's question is the state basically is trying to shoot its way out of the crisis. That is why this matters more so than ever before. They have a playbook that they engineered in one of these iterations of the national uprising in November 2019, which, much like this one, had a economic trigger for a larger political protest. That economic trigger was fuel subsidies. This economic trigger was inflation, if not hyperinflation. So an economic trigger for a larger political protest against the state by the street with this broader coalition that Neda is talking about. And in that time, under a 3 to 6 day internet blackout, and our friend and colleague Ali will tell you all about that, the regime killed, per Reuters, 1,500 people. Now the numbers that we have since the first day of the internet blackout on January 8th, and to get further on, is, depending on the source that is verified in terms of name, place, face, family, at least 4,500, depending on the Iranian Human Rights Agency in America or in Europe that you're using. But if you're using credible mainstream press, that actually is sourced in people that we occasionally get to hear from, which are doctors, lawyers, morgues, nurses, hospitals, morticians, and people in the service industry. If you're looking at that, which are the sources for credible mainstream reporting, you have Iran International saying 12,000. You have the Times of London saying 16,500. You have CBS News, not a radical organization, CBS News saying 20,000. And increasingly, when you talk to some of these people offline, you will begin to understand that these numbers are a bottom-of-the-envelope baseline calculation for the death. So what makes this entirely different? And I am, again, as a native New Yorker, the last person to put these numbers in terms of the scale of 9/11 or in terms of the scale of October 7. Just think about the scale and in the rapid timeline for that violence from the state against society. So this is why it fundamentally matters. And this is why, to the heart of Nick's questions, what does it look like now when you had, per European diplomats, 1.5 million people in Tehran between January 8 and January 10? Why you don't necessarily see that number today, despite all the censorship and filtering and digital repression and electronic Iron Curtain, is because they have never seen this level of mass crackdown with this speed from the state against society, not just in the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic, but in the last century of this larger struggle between the state and the street in Iran for popular government and representation. That's why this matters so much. That's why the regime is trying to cover it up so fast. Literally, Iranians are dying in the darkness. I've been saying this line since, unfortunately, November 2019, since that first digital Iron Curtain, but now they're dying in a scale that we've never seen before. And that is the kind of the urgent element of what's happening and why now.
Well, and can we talk about the regime response? So if we understand the repression apparatus to include kinetic options, the Basij, the IRGC, can you talk about mass arrests, the judiciary, executions? We're going to talk about the other line of effort in the digital space, but can you just talk about the kinetic space, what we have seen, which would underscore the way that the regime views these as being qualitatively different in terms of intensity?
Yeah, I mean, again, those of you who've been following this, you know that Iran has a cocktail of security forces that sometimes it shakes up and disperses at a different protest movement, at a different geography, at a different point in time. So they have at the top level the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, one branch of which is the ground forces of the Guard Corps. Since 2008-9, the Basij, which is the all-volunteer paramilitary, has been incorporated into the ground forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. One level beneath that, you have the police forces, the National Police. The acronym in English is LEF, Law Enforcement Forces. A subsidiary of that are the special units. In Persian, this is called the Yegane Vijay. Then beneath that, you also have, they're called vigilantes, but they retain a semi-state affiliation, but they're plainclothes militiamen. They're called vigilante groups. Even Treasury, I think, many years back began to sanction some of these groups, even though they were called vigilantes. And, a popular one that Iranians know and fear is called Ansar Hezbollah. They used to take any one of this cocktail, shake it up, throw it at a different protest movement at a different point in time. Sometimes the IRGC was in the lead, sometimes the Basij is in the lead, sometimes the police is in the lead. It just depends on what they're trying to do. This time you've seen large elements of almost all of it put together. But the X factor here is, and if you have an Iranian friend or an Iranian friend who came from Iran from 2009 to present, you will have heard this in the rumor mill, perhaps now never before confirmed with entities the likes of CNN, which is Iranians since 2009 have been saying we hear a foreign language on the streets amid this apparatus of repression. And it's kind of been in activist world, it's kind of been in diaspora world, it's never really been empirically proven. CNN mentioned 4, not 1, 4 Iran-backed Shia militia groups in Iraq that have crossed over the border from January. 3 of them are on the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organization list, meaning 3 of them have American and coalition service blood on their hands. These are now actively known to be on the streets in Iran. Then you talk your diaspora friends, your dissident friends. They will also talk about 2 other groups, which is Lebanese Hezbollah and the Afghan Fatimiyun. The Afghan Fatimiyun actually were brought in after flood protests in 2019 in the spring when parts of southern and central Iran were overtaken by floods and the regime had militias do flood reconstruction. But it just happened to be that flood reconstruction happened in places where there were protests after the flood because there was no reconstruction. So qualitatively, the regime is taking a kinetic approach to this. Some of you will see efforts by, Iran's president, Mr. Pezeshkian, to talk about trying to bribe his way through, pay anywhere from, depending on the report you're using or the dollar value, anywhere from $7 to $217. That was just kind of the fig leaf for the state to do, which is what you've seen them do, which is take this heavy-handed approach. And they're hoping the heavy-handed approach impedes protester coordination between each other in Iran, impedes the story between protester coordination and external opposition, perhaps more so an important link than before. And then most importantly, to make sure that these numbers, these faces, these names are not known to you, that these Iranians continue to die in the darkness, and that in the most proximate way, they avoid triggering President Trump's red line.
And this is a fantastic stopping point. We're going to switch over to a discussion on the technical aspects of the repression apparatus. But before we do, I do want to provide Congressman Dave Min, hi, sir, an opportunity to say a few words. He is the lead sponsor of the Freedom Act, which both of our organizations, FDD Action, have endorsed. And, sir, I'd love to turn it over to you for remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Dave Min. I was just elected in 2024 to represent California's 47th Congressional District in the heart of Orange County. So currently we have the cities of Irvine, Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach, Laguna Beach, and Seal Beach. And I'm told that it is maybe the largest non-Jewish Iranian diaspora in the world, or in the country. And certainly we have an amazing Iranian-American presence, people doing all sorts of different industries, get to celebrate Nowruz quite a bit. My old district director introduced me to a lot of the different Nowruz candies and celebrations over the years. But we are very blessed to have a vibrant Iranian-American community, and obviously the last decade has been incredibly traumatizing, including recent events over the last few weeks in Iran. Women Life Freedom, Masa Amini, and just all of the repression that we've seen taking place. So it was an easy call for us to introduce this bill, along with Claudia Tenney and Senators Rose and McCormick last month, the Freedom Act, H.R. 6469, which would require the Department of State to look into the feasibility of emerging technologies, including direct-to-cell, expansions of VPNs, and other technologies that might be used to try to ensure free access to internet and in different forms, to try to connect people with real information, not propaganda, to try to connect Iranians with their loved ones around the world. And of course, we know that the Iranian regime uses internet suppression as a tool to try to crack down on protests like the ones we're seeing right now. The hope is that this particular bill will help to lay the groundwork for promoting freedom, promoting access to objective information, and maybe in its way helping those who are seeking freedom in Iran. My sincere hope is that over the next few years we'll start to see more expansion, that these protests that are happening right now may thrive into something pro-democracy, and that they will be sustainable. But that can't happen if repression of information continues to occur. So that was one of the reasons that Claudia Tenney and I led a letter with 17 other of our House colleagues to President Trump, a bipartisan letter urging action on this bill, urging the Trump administration right now to try to do all they can to ensure internet access for those who are being clamped down on right now. And so we'd love your boss's support in the fight to expand and safeguard Iranian citizens' access to the internet. I want to thank PAAIA and FDD for all you do in this space, and look forward to hopefully working towards freedom in Iran and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Congressman. You have in a very short time become a leading voice on this issue, and it's felt, honestly, throughout the country, especially amongst the diaspora community. And that sets us up well for the pivot to digital censorship. So, Ali, if you could set the baseline, what's the status of internet access in Iran today? What have we seen through these protests? How has what we've seen through these protests been quantitatively and qualitatively different than what we've seen previously? Just help us understand the technical dimensions and the scale of what the regime has implemented over these last 3 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
And first, tell everybody a little bit, and we'll get into the technologies. So just, I'll shut up.
No, I'll give it a little bit of a context. I mean, basically, my job here is just translating between DC people and a bunch of nerdy engineers. So I'll get that. So basically, when we are talking about like censorship in a country like Iran, it is unique in several ways, and it is kind of similar to other countries. So Siphon is an open source tool, and it has like users coming from every single country on the planet, including North Korea. So like people coming because it is free, because you don't need to register while in. The anonymity is almost guaranteed from our side and everything. So we see that in different countries how it would evolve. One thing about Iran that you can say is that it has a sustained level of censorship for a long period of time. It is not like Cuba that like some stuff get suppressed for a short period of time and then lifted, or like Ethiopia or other things. In that regard, it is only comparable with Russia since the war, China, and to some extent Myanmar. So that is basically what we are dealing with. I have some slide like historically. If we go a little bit back, then I would like you to see how things move in general. So this is right before Masa Amini's project. Sorry, I'm standing up to show you what exactly it is. This is 1 million unique user every day coming before Masa Amini. This is where things go up. Again, it's stabilized to some extent. Some of this dip that you see is dip of funding, basically.
We'll talk about it.
Nice plug.
And then it goes up and down all different things. Like even you can see like when a big news happening in the country, you see a jump in the number of people who would like to come and see what is going on. But this is what moved between Mahsa Amini and before that. So this is one of them. If you go to the next slide, then this is basically show that how many. I'm going to use this point later. How many of people are on the network, on cellular network, like say AT&T and Verizon of Iran, and how many of them are the Wi-Fi? You can see the majority is on the mobile networks. I'll come back to this point, but we have like three big events that we can compare what happened today to. One of them is November 2019, as both Neda and Behnam mentioned. I'll go more deeper into each of them. The other one was Mahsa Amini, which is kind of not a total shutdown, but like on cellular, a little bit here, a little bit there. And the other one was during the war, during the Israel 12-day war. In all of them, when you compare, this recent one is the most extreme one. And this is the baseline. This is 4 million people coming from Iran to Saigon, like before the shutdown. And we are talking about like thousands of people. Yeah, it is not zero, but we're talking about less than 10,000 people every day. In November 2019, we could connect between 30,000 and 100,000 people to the network every day. In terms of the three dimension of speed, like the way that they did it between 2019 and now, we could see it on the network 50 hours before it happened in 2019. It happened only a few hours this time. The severity of it is completely in a different scale. We can see that, and that matters because the whole internet freedom concept exists on this collateral damage thing. So if you are willing to kill all your apps, everything that you have, then you can also shut down the internet. And that is something that we've seen this time more harsh than ever. And also the duration of that. Usually they didn't sustain it as long. As of 3 days ago, we see a little bit of trickling, and today we passed kind of north of 500,000 people coming to the network. In terms of the coming back to the before shutdown time, we are at like 10% connectivity in terms of the user and almost 8% in terms of byte going back and forth. This is an interesting one because I just wanted to zoom in and show you like between 5 and 10,000 people. But also, it is interesting that you can see that some people are getting access to the internet using Siphon, but through Starlink. So this blue line is kind of basically people inside the country who are having access, their access with the Starlink, but they are using Siphon in order to mask their IP. I think that is it.
Can I ask you a quick question?
We'll come. We'll dive into VPN in particular. But Neda, this may seem obvious to us, but I think what Ali, you linked this regime's physical repression, the violence, to its ability to shut down the internet. There's a connection there. Would it be acting as brutally as it is today if it couldn't do so behind that digital blockade? And so, Neda, my question to you is, why does this all matter to us as U.S. policymakers, right? Why should we care that Iranians are cut off from the internet? And we've talked, we've kind of hit on it, but dive deeper into it and tell us, what happens when this digital connection is unplugged.
Fantastic. So I am going to pick up a little bit from what I was just telling Ali to make sure you guys quite understand. So the shutdown that he's talking about in comparison to 2019, let me just take a step back so that we're all clear, is a shutdown of mobile networks. It's a throttling or a blocking of platforms. It is a blocking of international calls and landlines. Enormously, I think it's important for you to know that landlines have not been operational until recently. They are not only targeting cities, but isolating provinces. So the reach in the periphery, right? So this is when we talk about kinetic action, very often you are looking at cities, but this is telling us the Islamic Republic's reach is into the periphery, which is very important in kinetic action and not just communications. And then what we're going to talk about is this notion of whitelisting. So it's state-approved activity is the only thing that really remains visible, while international communication in and out. Please don't forget that the internet is a dual-use technology. Intel and information gets in, and it comes out. So this is not improvisation. So this is definite. I mean, in terms of the importance, we're not talking in comparison that Saifan was able to see 50 hours in advance the shutdown coming in 2019. They did this in 5 hours. I mean, just think about the effort, and then again the whitelisting. So this is planned, prepared governance through information control. This is repression through information control. And why is that important? Because internet shutdowns aren't just about censorship. I think one thing that Behnam has said really well is that freedom just doesn't die in the darkness, right? That this is it's not just for the Washington Post, but literally people are dying. Just because we're not seeing it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And so part of, as a former human rights lawyer, one thing that we talk about is the fact that, as again, dual-use technology, is that we can't, as you're denying freedoms and you're denying connectivity and the ability to communicate, that means we are not getting a documentation of killings. We are not getting the verification of mass arrests. We cannot locate detainees. There is no preservation of evidence for judicial hearings and transitional justice in the future. Shutdowns don't just silence voices and freedom, they create impunity. And this is why connectivity increasingly is best understood as part of what I would call a human rights infrastructure. I understand that for many people and policymakers, human rights is something that we can talk about and not talk about, but I think it is unbelievably important when we talk about national security. So we can talk about how this infrastructure is vital to human rights infrastructure, but also to a democracy in the Middle East and American national security infrastructure. So I would put those together, and if I can, Congressman Min talked about, and PAAIA is, along with our colleagues here on this panel and others who are not here, have been pushing for the Freedom Act, but I am going to jump ahead and say this could have been prevented. The Iran Internet Freedom Act was part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2025, passed into law in December 2024. There was an authorization for this a year ago. Ali is going to talk about more some of the technical direct to sell. You have to forgive me for jumping ahead and getting straight to it, but we had a year to be prepared. The United States had a year to be prepared. Congress, in an overwhelmingly bipartisan way, prepared national security infrastructure for the U.S.'s not Connecticut involvement in the Middle East and support to pro-democracy movements in the Middle East through Iran, and it did not get authorized.
It got authorized, not funded.
I'm sorry, appropriation.
Yes.
I am constantly getting those words. My apologies. Yes.
No, but you're exactly right, and I think that's part of the postmortem that we need to get into to do this issue justice.
So I just want to make sure, in going on a little bit long, that we get this right, that just as we talk about human rights for Iranians or human rights for the Middle East, it is part and parcel of America's national security to make sure that we get that right. And if we're looking to democracy for Iran and Iranians, that goes hand in hand with human rights and the connectivity infrastructure that's necessary.
So, Ali, can you talk about the specific State Department programs, USG programs that have funded technologies in this space? I also want to talk about what they are. We've hit on VPN, but we've not necessarily educated people on what that means, what that technology is, how it works. So if you want to take the State Department programs, USG programs that fund these capabilities, then let's get into VPN as a capability, and then maybe, Netta, we can get into direct-to-sell as well as a capability so we can all understand those two technologies and the programs that are supposed to be funding them.
So on that, let's start, what problem are we trying to solve here? So the problem that we are going to solve here is just you have a massive number of people, like population scale, we're talking about millions of people, that you would like to give them the access that the government is denying. So it starts with a few variable here, like it is censorship. It is important to remember that censorship is not a uniform thing. Like it varies from one ISP to another, it varies from one platform to another. It is a technical problem there. And the other part is that you need to do it in a form that millions of people can use it. Otherwise, you are not answering the need that it needs to do. So based on that, I think it was for more than 2 decades, the US foreign policy to let Iranians know what is going on in the world and also express themselves. What you see on the streets is not accidental, it didn't happen overnight. It is a long time. People like myself or younger than me grew up with these values. These are the things that US foreign policy wanted to put in the Middle East so these people can see what is going on. And that is where they go out and demand what they are looking for. I mean, these protests are like that. I mean, Gen Zs, I mean, in the previous protests, like Women Like Freedom, you definitely saw that. I mean, like something against compulsory hijab. This is something that was there by design. And that is to a good, almost entirely, thanks to State Department for doing that, and also Open Technology Fund, who kind of understood the problem, found the best way and solution to solve that censorship at scale, and design programs in order to respond to that. And it was Republican or Democrat. It's been the foreign policy for a long time. Unfortunately, that was stopped last year, specifically for VPNs. And unfortunately, it happened in a very, very unfortunate time. Exactly when we needed it the most, the ball was dropped. The reason that Sci-Fund actually exists is because the funds continue to come from Open Technology Fund. That the State Department just stopped all the funds back in April to Sci-Fund and other VPNs, and that is the moment that we needed most. And like going back to the other example of shutdown, during the 12-day war, all cellular, when I say cellular, means that you cannot have it on Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile. Like you leave the house, you cannot have internet. They blocked everything. They also blocked most of the protocols that most of the roads that these cars are moving in on the internet completely. Yet some parts of that was open, and we could, look at censorship like this. Like there are roads that are the cars are moving, and one day they say that okay, red cars cannot go, and then you paint the red cars blue, and then they go. And it was like, oh, there are too many. Let's just narrow the road. And then they said, oh, let's change the signage. Instead of going to New York, you are going to North Carolina. You don't even know where you're going. They changed the zip code. They changed the address. In technical terms, like GB broadcasting or other things, or stopping other aspects of this from working. When this is usual blockage, and this is something that VPNs are designed to answer. These are the days that you find this to work. When an extreme measure of that, like the shutdown that we call a shutdown, when there are fuzzy definitions, but when it goes below 5% connectivity, I say that it is shutdown. And when something like that happens, it's like no cars on the road. A few ambulances every now and then, but then you cannot paint all the cars ambulances because it is very obvious that what's going on. So these are the matters that you are doing that. And I think for a long time, State Department very, very intelligently and Open Technology Fund, together we're just funding these programs in a way that you cover both R&D, because you are dealing with massive amount of energy coming from State Department, coming from Islamic republics and other tools in order to fight that. And you are like an organization of like 50 people or a few others and trying to find holes in order to do that. R&D is an important part of that the State Department for a long time been funding it, and also you need basically the data that moves. And that was coming from OTF. And both together were working, and I think we were in a position to respond to some parts of that, but unfortunately, because of the cuts, we had to shrink the network. We dropped more than 1 million people every day before the shutdown, and And I don't know if I
No,
answered your...
that's great. And if there are any questions on VPN tech and what that means, let's get into that in the Q&A because I want to make sure we're tailoring that to the questions you have. But let's also talk about direct-to-cell. These are not mutually exclusive technologies. They are extraordinarily complementary, but most people don't know what it is. So Behnam and Netta, do you want to take this one? Netta, do you want to kick us off and then Behnam follow up? This is an emerging technology, I guess is fair to say. And there was a really interesting article actually in the Free Press, if anybody saw it, about Starlink terminals and the brave women who were bringing them into Iran. And this relates to the direct-to-cell. So,
correct me if I'm wrong. So just to clarify a few things about VPNs. So Starlink right now has about 40 to 50,000 receivers in Iran. Those have been, over the course of these weeks, jammed because while the satellite is in the sky, the receiver that's on the ground still needs a VPN to not be detected. So I want to clarify that you can't just have Starlink running and not have VPNs working, and the cat and mouse game, to be, I think, a little bit clear with our analogies and that notion, is that you, in order to play the cat and mouse game, even when there's a shutdown and even when you're using Starlink, is that you need the most researched and developed VPN to help the receiver on the ground still make sure that the receiver is not detectable by the Islamic Republic. And so what's important, and to clarify why that receiver is detectable, is because it runs on GPS, right? The Starlink dishes require GPS signals to orient themselves towards the satellites. So as they're orienting themselves, they're giving off the signal as to where they are. So they need the VPN to mask that signal to not be found. So this is part of, to clarify why these have to go hand in hand and why the research and development, as Starlink is advancing, the research and development on the VPNs to continue playing the cat and mouse game with the Islamic Republic is really important. So I just want to make sure we get that. And then, if you haven't heard, those, in addition to the VPN Starlink problem, is the fact that the jamming that has been used in Ukraine has now transferred back to Iran. So the Russians are supplying the mechanism to either do GPS jamming or signal interference, right? So it's not that Starlink has this magical solution to the internet, and I'm going to keep going. So there's also the signal interference problem. And so while we have been getting images and videos out, it's on a much reduced, an infinitely reduced, I'm just going to call it a wavelength, but don't hold me to that, wavelength on Starlink. And so, and that is on top of the costs that go with Starlink, right? So I'm not even going to talk about, get to too much, but I do want to continue talking before I get to direct-to-cell that we're clear on Starlink. The last I read was that there are 650 direct-to-cell satellites for 12 million people from Australia to the United States to connect on these satellites. That does not allow 92 million people, let's just run with that, 92 million Iranians to jump onto what is direct-to-cell. The direct-to-cell technology is via what's called unmodified smartphones, right? So all the smartphones post-2020 are going to have this capability, and they run on 5G protocols, right? So, and the satellites, so SpaceX is 650, and I think I just saw some intel number that they actually just launched a rocket on Monday for more satellites to go into the sky, and we don't know if it's like actually for Iran. But the number 650 that are up right now for direct-to-cell are in theory supposed to increase. But again, that's because 12 million people between the United States and Australia, and I'm not really sure about Asia, cannot be on those 650 satellites full scale all the time, right? But there is, when it comes to direct cell, an advantage over Starlink in the sense that you don't need special equipment. You don't need the receiver on the ground because it's just your phone, right? You don't need a covert activation, so no visible equipment to identify users. Again, the receiver. There has to be a clear shot for Starlink receivers on the ground into the sky. So you have to find space to set that up. When we talk about direct to cell and its use of 5G or LTE, that covert activation isn't necessary. Also, direct to cell is harder to jam. So unlike Starlink that has had this, and the Russians who've had the experience in Ukraine and are now moving it to to Iran, the standard cellular protocols for direct to cell don't require that GPS positioning, right? So you don't need the big space and you don't need the positioning like you do for dish terminals with Starlink. And then really importantly, direct to cell is so scalable. Every person I'm just going to, again, stick to the 92 million people in Iran, they all have smartphones. They all have smartphones, and they're actually very, very up-to-date usually on their phones. In terms of people spend money, it's a status symbol to walk around with not just even the latest iPhones, but also, very much like the United States, consumer society if they can, but also Android. So those post-2020 phones are everywhere. So there is a mass scalable reach. And then there's the question of data capability. The reason I told you about the 12 million users for Starlink for that 650 satellites is not everybody can be on there and they can't be doing everything. They can be doing SMS, they can be texting periodically, they can be sending videos. But with direct to cell, it has this emerging capacity for images and videos, not just text. So I don't know if I should stop in the sense that maybe I've told you all the positives of direct to cell and not enough of maybe some of the details of direct to cell. But when I say that there was a year between the NDAA 2025 getting, make sure I get it correct this time, authorized in December 2024, there was a year where research and development could have been working through the US government and pushing and advocating for direct to cell satellite technology. A lot happens in a year. So when I say that we are reacting again and again, and back to your initial question of, it's another protest, the United States could have been preventing this internet shutdown. The world was yelling about this internet shutdown, and we are again reacting, despite the fact that there was legislation that had been passed and signed into law. And direct to cell is one of the things that was included for research and development and private-public partnerships. So again, I'm not sure if I've talked enough about the details of how direct to cell works as opposed to its pluses and not its cons. So I will stop there for a moment.
It's important to talk about the cons, I think, with both of these technologies, because one of the reasons I think there's resistance by some to fund them is because they say they don't work or, they're not 100% foolproof. And so I actually do think it's important that we touch on it. But Benham, anything that you wanted to add?
Just a few footnotes there, because the first thing, let's work backwards with what both Neda, Ali, and Nick said. We're sitting in U.S. Congress right now. The perfect has never been, nor should it be, the enemy of the good. Every technology, everything that levels the playing field between the street and the state will cost money, will take time, can allow the regime or any other kind of malign actor that's keeping the regime in business. Here we're talking about the more advanced national security states of the Russians and the Chinese or anyone else to help find workarounds. The question for us here, focused on policy, is can you help level the playing field between the street and the state to make sure that the next time Iranians are out there, that they don't A, die in the darkness, and that B, the best, the bravest, the brightest don't get sent to their deaths every time they're out in the street. And this is why I want to foot stomp 2019, because that is actually when the wake-up call for Washington should have been. We literally, after that, we're talking about a bipartisan protest policy playbook, because we knew there would be more. So I don't mean to open old wounds or relitigate, but if we are talking about legislation, it was the Iran Act from 2024, House and Senate, some of it had money authorized. The other one, appropriated or authorized? I'm forgetting now.
Yes,
Authorized.
Authorized.
And there's a
then the
new
other
version
one
coming.
Can we actually chime in that Congress actually gave us $5 million more than we asked for? This should blow everybody away, that Congress in a bipartisan way understood how critical this technology and this funding would be for pro-democracy and peace in the Middle East. And they added $5 million in a conservative environment per year. We asked for $10 million a year, and they said $15 million a year.
Now, consider that price to a potential F-35. talk about what Uncle Sam has to scale up or scale down in the costs, not just moral, put that aside for a second, God forbid, but just look at the budget in terms of what was a missed opportunity. So let that sink in. And then again, if we're mentioning old bills, the Maximum Support Act literally talked about the scalability of direct-to-cell, introduced last year, supported, taken apart to have NDA amendments in it, ultimately didn't pass, but is still on the floor, literally has the idea of direct-to-cell coming from activists, coming from the tech center, trying to get ways to get this technology into the hands of the Iranians, because Iranians have seen that since the first major shutdown in November 2019, there is the need for satellite internet, but that there is some kind of a slow rolling, whether it's by Uncle Sam, the tech sector, regulations, what have you, of physically getting this stuff into Iran. Because what do you have to do? This has to basically be smuggled in. That's why there's a USG aversion. That's why there's a business aversion. That's why the direct-to-cell gets around this smuggling problem, because you're physically using something that you've already gotten. And, it's great that a lot of the Starlink terminals, the activation fees either being taken care of either on the high side by someone in the States or elsewhere, or, being, done away with. But this is something that Iranians already have. And again, levels the playing field between the state and the street. So whether we're looking at what the Iranians are doing to Starlink, or what the Iranians are physically, in terms of the government, doing to the population, which is to go into the houses where the Starlink is on the rooftop, arrest the family, or beat the family, or take them again, without even processing them, for housing that terminal. This is why, quite literally, opting to the mobile network will save lives and will save dollars. Again, we talked about that intersection. We seldom get the opportunity to do well by our values in the Middle East and do well by our strategy in the Middle East. This is one of those opportunities with direct-to-cell.
Just a few points to Neda's and
then I do want to open it up for questions. So please think of any questions. Give us some hard, tough, technical questions, because we're very happy to answer them, and we have a group here who can.
Both Neda and Benham beautifully said that we need sort of a holistic approach to this internet freedom problem in Iran. And different technologies are playing different roles in that. It is not like put one of them aside because the other one is better. No, all of them are needed to be on top of each other for the whole ecosystem to work, and for all the time that it works. When you're talking about, for example, solving the population scale of censorship, you are talking about like a specific, say, let's start with the Starlink. Don't take this as we don't need a Starlink. We need 10 times more than what we have Starlinks in Iran. But it is like giving some Iranians Lamborghini, or where it says you have a bus card for VPNs. The return of investment that Behnam mentioned, each Iranian is connected to the network for the whole entire month for less than 10 cents. That is the return of investment that we are talking about. And they work actually together. Like if some person are connected through creating a mesh network within the population, you can get everybody connected. It is not that one of them goes and the other one stays. The other one is also security. Both Behnam and Neda mentioned it. If you have a Starlink and you use your bank account, you are broadcasting your IP that you are using a Starlink to your bank account. You know what happens next. That's why a lot of people actually in the instruction of a Starlink, you are supposed to use a VPN on top of it in order to mask your IP. And the other point that I would like to make it kind of a difficult point to make it in DC, but usually there is a long distance between something being functional in lab and it working at a scale. In the US, everywhere. When you change that environment to a place like Iran, then suddenly it is 10 times worse. That is basically, aside from that's what we do. Look at the papers that are coming out of the different universities and try to just make it workable at a scale, and then bring it to people like Iran or Myanmar or Russia and other places. So these are the points that. And we have enough of capable people in DC to understand all these points, and drafting those holistic kind of strategies in order to solve the problem. But I think there is sort of a broken telephone, specifically in the past year, between people who wanted to get things done and people who knew how things done. And somehow we missed the ball completely last year.
And I'll put a plug in for the Freedom Act, the Min-10 bill.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
really is aimed at moving this ball forward, moving this R&D forward, requiring the government to develop a strategy, how it's going to deploy all of these different tools. So it gets at almost all of what we're talking about, and it's low-hanging fruit in our opinion. But I do want to open it for questions. Any takers? And you don't even need to have, yeah, sir. And just say your office, and I'm going to repeat the question just for the sake of everybody hearing it and the camera.
My name is Benjamin, Chief of Staff for Congressman Eric Swalwell. We're grateful to have secured the room for PAAIA and grateful for their partnership. We have a bill that does focus a lot on direct-to-cell and satellite and direct-to-cell technology. Is there a frontier beyond that we should also be exploring? Are there papers coming out of universities about a next generation of, I don't know, decentralized mesh networks or something? What's beyond DTC?
So the question, just for those watching the stream, what is beyond direct to cell? What's the future hold in this space?
I would like to answer it from a kind of a policy point of view. As I said, like both at the State Department and at Open Technology Fund, you have capable of people who understand both the technology and context of these countries. Because most of the time, what we are missing is not understanding of the technology, but understanding the context of making that workable in those countries. And if we just zoom out a little bit and empower these people to actually using platforms such as Freedom Act to make that decisions and streamline how that could be translated into actual policy, then we solve that problem. Because yes, 2 years from now it would be totally different landscape. 3 years from now, maybe some stuff working, maybe some stuff not working. But making that process workable, I think, would be a solution that is not going to expire anytime. And that would be my recommendation from the policy point of view. As you know, every week there is something coming up that have some potential and maybe not. And the other suggestion that I have, I mean, specifically like places such as DARPA that focus a lot on the innovation, could spend more money on anti-censorship and bring that kind of innovation to the front of the work. So kind of interagencies working together in order to solve those problems, I think would be my recommendation rather than a specific technology that we can focus on.
And I would just like to add very quickly, one, thank you to Congressman Swalwell for his continued efforts with PAAIA on internet accessibility. And two, just as a reminder that both the provision that was part of the NDAA as well as the Freedom Act, there is such a broad amount of freedom, particularly in the former, given to the State Department for itself to develop a comprehensive strategy on this. We're very cognizant that the State Department, like any department, doesn't want to be told what to do. And so there is a provision for research and development as well as a clear handing off of a comprehensive strategy across the IC and other departments, including Treasury and OFAC, to make sure that whatever internet accessibility is pushed forward by the State Department, that it is one that they want to do. And so they have the secretary who was signing waivers until June of last year, has the broadest and for our intents and purposes, we don't even know how to make it much broader except to say, please develop a comprehensive strategy on this and work with the government, the other parts of the government. And so, but importantly, I do think that funding for research and development is the way forward to work across, whether it's DARPA or internally and at OTF, to work those provisions out.
And just, again, last footnote, because it's an excellent question. We need to get as creative legislatively as we do academically and on the tech side. And an interesting legislative not workaround, but attempt to build off of the D that Ali had mentioned, DARPA. There was also an amendment last year that was not ultimately, unfortunately, included in the NDAA, which pertained to the DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit. sometimes we do have to find ways to provide internet and secure comms for our service persons wherever they're deployed in the world. How about some of that tech that comes up with ways to provide secure comms, internet, tech for our troops in hostile situations, in potential warfare? How about that potentially be extended to friendly populations in captured societies when perhaps we may not have the State Department program for it? So seeing it through the DoD prism. That was unfortunately something that was not included in the NDAA, but there was kind of support for on the Hill up until we got to the holiday season last year. So again, there's just as many legislative fixes for this as there are kind of tech and political.
And we'll be back at it this cycle with that language. Any other questions from anybody? I also want to make the point, too, on the defense side. Let's pretend like you don't care at all about human rights. I'm sorry, Netta. Let's pretend you don't care about the values equation of any of this. Isn't it great to invest in a low-cost technology that kneecaps your adversary, that prevents their decision space, that reduces their optionality to retaliate to U.S. action, to quiet and silence their population? If you just want to look at this from a realpolitik kind of perspective, there's great value in investing in these technologies because they give the United States defense and national security leaders more options against a U.S. adversary. So I'm not saying I buy all the values and interests argument, but if they're not compelling to you, just from a straight-up military perspective, there is value in investing in what is, in the scheme of things, a very low-cost, accessible technology. I think if there's no other questions, we'll just wrap it with sort of final,
One last idea on that for your bosses or your boss's friends, just because there is a line I've been throwing around. It's a line you may have heard paraphrased to Henry Kissinger a long time ago, which is that foreign policy is not missionary work. You know, you guys quite literally are working with taxpayer dollars to fund stuff that is in the national interest. And then when we have the luxury of being able to focus on not just that, then we can have these programs. But these programs aren't just kind of charity activity, as Nick was saying. You know, there's just room for a very creative letter idea based on something Netta just said and that I followed up on about jamming and spoofing, which is that if there are great power adversaries of the United States of America helping keep the Islamic Republic in business through electronic warfare, through jamming, through GPS spoofing, through static, to deter the money that we have spent and impede the activity behind the effort to get Starlink since 2022 into the hands of Iranians, that could be an amazing letter idea that actually cuts at this issue, not from the human rights standpoint, but from the great power competition standpoint, to be able to talk about this issue through multiple vantage points, to broaden the coalition for support to the Iranian people here, much like the Iranian population has been broadening its own protester coalition over this past decade. I don't think we can afford to just slice at this issue as a human rights issue because you all know better than I. You know, when you do sit down, when you do bargaining for bills, you do trading, when you do talk across the aisle, unfortunately, in foreign policy, one of the first things to go is human rights. It's not treated as a hard security issue. And again, if you just look at what this could achieve for the U.S. versus, you know, if we, God forbid, are getting up to some kind of broader military activity here, what that will cost. So again, the values proposition, but also the strategic competition proposition, but also the financial cost proposition. These are all different ways to skin this cat.
And imagine if we were meaningfully able to erode this regime's ability to censor in this most recent round of protests. We not only would have saved lives, we would have built leverage, and that leverage could have been deployed in any number of ways. So it's a human rights tool, it's a diplomatic tool, and it's a military tool that we're talking about.
And I want to chime in and piggyback off of what you just said in terms of leverage, and also to circle back to kind of how I started this conversation, or at least my points beyond that we're seeing an increase in the size in the coalition, but to my point about mandated preparedness. The policy question, I think, isn't can we as the United States help? The question is, why wasn't the United States ready this time? And now the question is, will we be ready next time? Because you know it's coming. Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. And I think it's about preparedness and the will to get it done.
Ali, any
remarks? just some quick points to Benham's points about a return of investment. As I said,
I promise I'm not a penny pincher that much.
It's been an investment. It's been a continuous investment for a long time. on these anti-censorship technologies. And if we believe that it is in the interest of the United States to Iran to have a democratic nations and everything on that, we can also use the tools that is already working at this space. I mean, this was something that I've tried to pitch in DC for a long time. Once you, right after the 12-day war, we did a kind of a survey from Iranians, because we have like millions of people, then we can ask them. Even 1% of them answer, it would be massive. It was a 25-question survey, and in a span of like 4 days, 30,000 people responded to that. One question that was very interesting, because it was a kind of a trend that you could see what was looking at, Iranians liked United States, like their quote-unquote love for United States increased over the past few years, and their kind of love for EU decreased over the past few years. It was something interesting. That and I was in a European country, a State Department, their State Department, and they asked like, why do you think is that? It's like, because people know that U.S. is on their side. They know that this access is coming from the U.S. They see all these values. When people are being hanged, U.S. says something. Other countries do the same? Maybe yes, maybe no. What I'm saying is that already this investment has some tools in place that if U.S. policymakers would like to directly to talk to them, they can. Like to Ben's questions, I think we already invested so much, but we even are not using what is on the table. And this is something that, again, I think it is more of a broken telephone between different agencies and how you would like these policies to be implemented and other things. But I just wanted to highlight that we already have those tools, and obviously more investment would be great, but we've come a long way. It is not enough. We have to be prepared next time and everything. But there are some lessons learned that, as Iranians learned this time how to shut the internet down so rapidly, so effectively, there are some lessons that we can also learn how to counter it next time.
Benham, any last words?
No, actually, if we have a little bit of time, I'd love to put a question to Ali just to make sure everyone is kind of on board, because you may be, if you are following the news out of Iran, for the past 2 days, you may have seen reports by both a vice president and a minister and some tech people in Iran talking about the slow reintegration of the internet. Neda talked about the landline issue. They only recently opened that, and that's only for one-way calling from inside to outside. All of this is painting a very fuzzy picture, again, because the regime is trying to weaponize the information environment. Ali, if you wouldn't mind lending us your tech brain for 1 second, there is this other thing that the regime is trying to paint as an alternative as it gets the debate right about internet shutdown, internet throttling, nationwide blackouts, and that's internet versus this small story you've been hearing and seeing in fits and starts since 2011, which is intranet. And this is the regime's own national internet. Sometimes they joke, they call it the halal internet. Ali, can you talk about just the difference and why we should not settle for this? Because there's also rumors that, this shutdown could go on for quite a while. Can you just walk us through the internet versus intranet? Because I think this is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is it's like probably if you turn the clock back and you go like 25 years, 30 years, Khamenei would decide that we don't want internet to begin with. Let's just forget about it. We can be another North Korea, happy and forget about it. But we are not there anymore. You can see that through different development of internet in Iran, how it developed. Like at the first, it was meant to be access. So you have like thousands of ISP when it comes to Wi-Fi. When it comes to cellular, you have only 2. The mentality is more of a control. And a few years later, Khamenei has been very vocal about it, like this space needs to be managed, like many times. They came up with this halal internet or intranet or NIN concept that theoretically they create an island that everything there works, but they cannot talk to outside. or they can talk to outside, but under surveillance. This strategic move came a little bit too late. For China, it was very, very effective. They already created whatever they wanted, like the equivalent of Uber and Instagram and everything, and then they made it very expensive to get out, and then they created an ecosystem internally. For Iran, it came a little bit late. But it doesn't mean that they stopped. They really want to do that. Are they going to be successful or not will be the question that I do not know the answer yet, but my guess is that in the recent shutdown, as Neda pointed out, a lot of calls, a lot of things were down. The airports were in mayhem. Banks did not work. Pharmacies did not work. Would it be something that they would like to sustain forever? Yes. But can they? My guess right now is that no. And you can see in the past 3 days that we returned like to 10% connectivity from less than 1%. So that is my guess. But yes, but to Behnam's and Neda's point, they want to create this tiered access. So officials, Iranian officials have access to everything. They can tweet whatever without any problem. But when it comes to people, they cannot really talk to each other. That is the strategic view that they are going, and technically they are spending a lot of money on that. We can counter that? Yes. Do we do it? Time will answer.
So have we seen the concept of the NIN deployed in a new way during these protests?
Yes, both in 2019, we did see that ride-hailing was working like half a percent of the time, 50% of the time, and this time also after a few days they restored some of this stuff. It means that they could, but could it sustain it for a long period of time? Remains to be.
But isn't this, so along the lines of this whitelisting, hasn't the throttling or the shutdown now been longer than it was in 2019? Don't you see that this is, I interpret it as the whitelisting and the building of the intranet is actually further along.
Of course. Yes. No, it is.
I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that we're seeing this.
Absolutely. Would it be 100%? We'll see. And my money is that no, it wouldn't be 100%. But maybe in 5 years, yes. You are talking about the resources of the whole country going toward a specific mission that Supreme Leader is very interested in. So, yeah.
It's also worthy of a government study and an
Yeah.
inquiry, just how that's being deployed, the connectivity into
There
Chinese
are a
tech
bunch
and-
of
yeah.
Iranian websites that, if you do open source work like your boss does, or you're looking for data with stuff from Iran, there's a bunch of .coms. Now you need to move to .ir. I think there's been like 15 or 30 different websites that are kind of critical to open source media monitoring that have been moved to .ir, some by force, many just kind of by state compellence.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and again to Benjamin Nedo's point, I think this is super important to understand the context. I think, for example, General License 2, when it came, it was good to just say that because at some point the U.S. Services decided to deservice Iranians, so automatically they were helping people to migrate into the country. And when General License 2 came, that kind of reversed. So these are the points that in the policy it is absolutely important to know the context in order to be responsive to this matter.
Great. Well, thank you. We'll wrap. A question.
Yes, thank you all for your insight. My name is Enya Wei. I'm from Representative Suzuki's office. My question is, we often have constituents that mention how sanctions obviously have harm to the middle class of the Iranian population, and specifically thinking about this topic of digital freedom and whatnot. I'm curious because while there have been attempts to carve out exceptions so that sanctions don't necessarily target anti-censory technology, there still seems to be ambiguity / an unwillingness for certain companies to work within providing those resources in Iran. And so I'm just curious, especially for the Freedom Act, is this messaging that the United States wants and is encouraging this kind of interaction in order to ensure that these technologies are more accessible, that companies are actually pursuing it? Because within the federal agency that's responsible for this, like it's clear that yes, there can be this access to this resource, but it's still not being pursued in the private sector. And so I'm just curious, as we think about, the purpose of this long-term study, but this in general, other components of how Congress can be aware of this issue and supportive, what can be accomplished in order to tackle that particular issue.
I'll be short about it. The good news about stuff like the Freedom Act, both the study, the technology, and the potential scalability, is that you actually have a pretty diverse political group right here that has been able to come together on this least common denominator assessment, wherever we stand on things like JCPOA, wherever we stand on things like max pressure, wherever we stand on things like Trump, wherever you stand on things like regime change versus behavior change in Iran. The ability to get already this panel off the ground, to me, communicates that there is sufficient political interest to hold the federal government accountable and responsible, that if you get this study, that they would need to implement it. And then we would look to you guys in Congress to help exercise oversight. So, yes, there have been impediments. Do I think the impediments have been overstated? Absolutely, I do think they've been overstated. But regardless of my personal views, and we can talk about the role of the Iranian government in terms of impacting this debate, I actually think that the fact that we have a very diverse, broad viewpoint represented up here in support of stuff that is contained in the Freedom Act creates the political space for Congress that if this stuff is passed and implemented and the study is funded, to be able to actually implement this regardless of some of the other bureaucratic hiccups that we've seen in the past from USG. And whether you can get the private sector on board is an entirely different matter, and we can talk about their motivations offline, but this is a nice enough, I think, broad coalition. And I think, yes, just like Neda said, it's too little too late sometimes, given the costs Iranians have paid in terms of life and blood and treasure. But I feel like this is the start of something broad, not even bipartisan, but nonpartisan.
I'll say, too, I was at the State Department during the first Trump administration doing Iran work, and we took a very favorable licensing policy toward these kind of technologies. There is a general license available. I think it comes down to dialogue. If there is somebody who wants to get into the Iranian market under the general license and doesn't feel comfortable doing that, then that's where they should come to you, and you should put some pressure on Treasury, or they should. We can solve most of these issues, and I think that's where both the executive and Congress have to work together. Congress needs to continue to press the administration, whatever administration, to continue to take a favorable licensing policy with regard to these technologies. State NEA yesterday, I think, tweeted something reiterating the licensing policy with regard to these technologies. But I think it's a constant dialogue. Any problem, I'm also confident that you can solve if there's enough will there, and there should be enough will. We would definitely go to bat for any company who wanted to get in this space and felt like they were constrained to do so because of sanctions. And I think that's generally, we can overcome most of the hurdles.
And I think that's really the importance of sort of that comprehensive strategy for the State Department to work with the Treasury and specifically to get OFAC clarification. The reason that we asked for a comprehensive strategy from the Secretary of State and clearly the State Department is because of the connectivity that should be existing and does historically exist between state and Treasury. And so to get OFAC clarification, I will tell you, Murata's in the back there, G2 was late coming. And so it is something that has been pressured and pushed for. And so it is beyond a doubt, having talked to companies like Meta and Google who have their own internal human rights inside the Office of the General Counsel is the human rights committees, as well as the banks have their risk committees. So something like this absolutely has to be spearheaded at the highest levels with private-public collaboration. But let us not forget that can come under humanitarian connectivity contracts. Right. So in addition to OFAC clarification, there is the humanitarian connectivity contracts that the State Department can actually do directly with providers. So you're never going to, because of OFAC, you're not going to get around the Treasury Department. But again, this is something that the State Department can help on. And this is something that can be spearheaded from Congress. I don't think that you're going to get away and should get away from congressional engagement on this. I mean, the tech companies are your constituents, right? I mean, last I checked the law, right?
If you're hearing from them that they're having issues, you should scream that from the mountains, and that should be resolved. Like that, sanctions should not be an impediment to these kinds of technologies getting into the hands of Iranians. And if they are, there's a problem with sanctions policy.
I will just say, like, based on what we saw years ago, it really does require sometimes the executive branch to get out there and say, we want to talk to the tech community. We promise you this. We will walk you through this is how it gets done. And then I think currently it's the flip way. It has to be done the other way.
Great. Yes.
My name is Ida Garrett, and I'm actually an Iranian American. I've kind of just stepped into this meeting. I am not with a congressional office, but I am a constituent of Representative Swalwell's district, and happen to be here for another meeting and happened to see that this was going on. So from my perspective, what I can tell you is, for all of those who are here as staffers and for the panel, our connection to family has, just this morning, I received a couple updates from them, but it is, just want to impress upon all of you that this is the reality that we're faced with today. And to the panel's point, yes, we should have known maybe, we should have been prepared, but it's not too late. So if you can, your call to action from our perspective is to go and get it right. Because there's still time. There's still people suffering today.
Thank you.
Every minute.
Absolutely.
Every day. And our inability to connect with those folks leaves us in a lurch to understand truly what's happening. And then the numbers are just still coming in.
Absolutely.
And it's terrifying to see what's happening to the people who are brave enough to go out there knowing what's in store.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And with that, we'll wrap. Thank you on that note. But look, we are available, PAAIA, FDD action and we didn't even talk about U.S. Iran policy and all the questions we could get into, red lines and the like. So there's a lot more to talk about on this topic. We're here as resources for all of you. So please do reach out if you have any questions. This is of particular interest to us, but we do cover the full range of Iran-related issues and much, much broader than that as well. So thank you again, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our panelists.